So these Brexit things, eh? That's a bit of homegrown madness. Sup kids, how are you doing today? So, I don't know if it's just me or if it's just you or the way things are going, but the way I've structured the podcast this year, it seems like I don't do these as often as I would, and maybe it's just because I recorded a bunch in kind of quick succession and then scheduled them all instead of recording them once a week. However, welcome back. I hope you've been well. So I've been watching the world unfold. I mean, yesterday I watched Notre Dame burn down, which was an interesting experience, and I can't say I particularly cared for it, but things happen, and there's projects to work on, and the world to keep revolving. But one of the things which is dominating, and I mean dominating, the UK, at least at the minute, and I imagine parts of the rest of the world, is this whole Brexit thing. Which is, I mean, it was expected. Whether you want to admit it or not, and whether you agree with Brexit or you don't agree with Brexit, you will be unable to deny that it will change the way the political landscape works within England, at least for the foreseeable future, because it's one of these events which just is going to happen and is going to be referenced and used and just be part of the landscape for the next 20 years at least. It's a lot like, I mean, this is our minor strikes in terms of our generation or my generation. I say our generation, I just assume that you're the same generation as me. Apologies, you're not as old as me, or you may be older, I don't know, but this is our minor strikes. This is our kind of deal. Iraq was our Cold War, it was our Falklands, and then came along and there's this Brexit situation. But it keeps going on, and in a way, when I stand back at it, I can't help but look at it and think it's beautiful. It's a beautiful mess. In the same way you look at an abstract painting, it's a beautiful mess. It's something which you can't really, you couldn't orchestrate it. I mean, people did orchestrate it, but you couldn't do it planned. There's no way. There's too many variables. Even if you tried to orchestrate it, it wouldn't end up just as well as it has, and it's beautiful in a sadistic kind of way. But I'm a person who likes to watch the world burn, so what do I know? But what it has brought out is a huge amount of campaigners, a huge amount of activists, and on both sides, hate groups and other groups, and new political parties and new ways of thinking, and people kind of breaking the lines of partisan voting. I did a whole podcast on partisan voting with my brother a couple of years ago, 2 Christmases ago. We chatted about partisan voting and how it kind of destroys political landscape. But this has shook everything up in terms of how things work and how people go. But what it got me thinking on was something which is a message I think I've discussed before within podcasts. And there's a very fine line between having an opinion and an idea and a cause, and pushing that idea and a cause, and attacking another group of people. I'm a firm believer that different ideas can exist, and they can exist, and they do exist. And when they compete with one another, then that's where kind of friction develops. But I think that friction can be good for a society, because it generates conflict, and not so much conflict, but it generates a bit of competition. It generates different ideas. You don't problem solve by sitting in a room on your own. You problem solve by getting a different perspective, by viewing things from different things, from taking on new information. That's how things evolve and how things change, and that's how humanity works as a whole. But obviously, it can lead to bitterness. It can lead to a whole host of just overwhelming pettiness, the geopolitics of it all, the race politics, the gender politics of it all. It can lead to a lot of attacking on people. And I saw some recent posts, and of course Facebook's just rife with it, because Facebook is an anonymous or semi-anonymous platform for people to just spout whatever they want, and usually it goes unchallenged, because for the most part the people you have on Facebook are people who agree with you, because they're from your friend groups. They're people who are just going to go, yes, this is a great idea, you're speaking the truth, and then as soon as you put it on Twitter, you get attacked, because Twitter is a more open platform. So rather than living in the little bubble. I've been getting a little bit more into Twitter, and I don't know if I like it. But you open the bubble a little bit, and as soon as that happens, then suddenly there's an enemy, there's someone to fight against, there's someone to rail against. And while some people like that, and some people can deal with that, some people can't. So what is the point I'm getting at here? As I say, I started using Twitter recently, and a lot of that is blank statements aimed and just fired into the universe. In order to get conflict going, in order to generate that conflict. Now, so I'm not a fan of bullying. Who is? It's one of my things. I was bullied as a kid, and I know adults who bully people, and I know I can recognize bullying, and I can recognize mob mentality. And when you use mob mentality to descend an opinion, that's not right, in my view. Regardless of the opinion, whether it's a positive or a negative opinion, if you use mob mentality and peer pressure to push that opinion, you will never change the mind of the person you're trying to change. They may appear to accept it, but they won't entirely. I believe generally you have to have discussion. You have to convince them rather than berate them. But again, this kind of brings me round to my point, which I've already gotten lost on through 2 or 3 times. So what it made me think of was when I was watching this shouting, and it's people shouting. It's people on 2 sides of a river or a coin just yelling at each other at times. That's all it is. There's a few like nuggets of moments of clarity from either side, and you kind of sat there going, oh yeah, you know what, maybe that actually makes sense. The EU offered an olive branch and was like, yeah, if you extend, I don't think it's possible to get the deal you want in the time you want, so what if we just extend it even longer? I'll put that out there. That was like the head of the EU put that out there. But I was watching it, and I'm watching it from Sandless, as I do. And I say, to me, it's like watching a car crash, or the Hindenburg. It's terrible. You watch it, and it's a mess. And it's an absolute mess. It's watching someone drop a pot of pasta in slow motion. It's a bowl of chili dropping out of a hand. You can't look away, because you need to see what happens at the end of it. You need to grasp onto it and go, oh my God, this is going to make such a mess. But you can't look away. You just can't. There's no way around it. There's nothing which you can do about it, because it's what you want to see. Well, you don't want to see it. You're just extremely curious because it's something you've never done, because it's a change. What about all those millions of times? And then you've got some context, and maybe you can even look at it and use it as a life lesson. You can come along and go, oh no, that's what happens when you try and carry too much chili at once. And that's a whole other situation. But it reminded me of a line which I watched. Wow, words. When I was watching a documentary on Vietnam. I know, I sound like such a middle-aged man. I'm watching war documentaries. It was generally interesting. I didn't know particularly much about Vietnam, because it wasn't my war. It wasn't something I was alive for. It's something which I've caught up with afterwards, and it's not even something which is particularly taught in UK schools, because it wasn't particularly our war. It was America's war. So I just find it interesting to kind of delve into it, and it gets into the whole political landscape of how these things came about and all that kind of stuff. But there was a really interesting phrase which was spoken by a former military, I want to say general, but he probably wasn't a general. Might have been like a sergeant, something in the military, fairly high-ranking officer, who used a phrase which I've discussed with a couple of friends of the military doesn't train you to be a killer. It's not a beginning to end process. It is not something where you kind of sit up and go, right, we have these people and we need to train them to kill people. He described it as the army is finishing school. And I thought that was an amazing sentence. It's the military is not a process for teaching, it is a finishing school for killers. And I thought that was fascinating, because it brings up this whole argument of humanity and our basic nature. Now, what he was trying to say was that people naturally can kill. given the right situation, that people can naturally kill. And it's proven. We look at a society, people do kill, even outside the military. That is just a fact. People kill for one reason or another, whether it's self-defense, whether it's, to attack people. Excuse me, sorry about that. People do kill. So the military, to him, is just finishing school, is teaching you how to do it efficiently, how to do it without thinking, how to do it without that reservation which you get trying to think, should I do this? Is it morally right? Etc., etc., etc. And I'm not going to get into all of that because I have other gripes on the military, which we'll go into a whole other podcast, which people can rip on me on. So thinking of that line and how it's basically just finishing school, it got me thinking about this whole idea of good and evil. Now, I'm not a person who believes in evil. Evil as an entity does not exist in my view. I believe there can be people who commit awful actions, and I believe there are people who can be trained to commit awful actions. But I do not believe there isn't something in this world which is inherently good or inherently evil. I just don't believe that, because in one way, I don't believe that because it takes away any choice what you have within your life. But secondly, I think that it's worth thinking those we see as evil can be changed, because if not, then what's the point? It takes away that whole decision. So my view on humanity is that we, as people, are very gifted at figuring out the quickest point from point A to point B, and then basically efficienting this. Now, we've proven this time and again because we have technology and we have food delivery systems and we have, process production. That is what humanity does. That is what we do. And there's nothing particularly evil about that. It is just the nature of us to look at things logistically and go, if I need to do this and this is the way I need to do it, then I will create that. Now, obviously, that can be also used in a terrible sense, as it has been used in a terrible sense in the past, and in things like warfare, in things like genocide, in things like serial killers. So it's a double-edged sword. It's the worst and the best of humanity. So when you think about this whole idea that military is a finishing school, essentially military enlistment and heading off to do that isn't particularly teaching you how to be a killer. It's showing you the path which will allow you to do the end point in a way which is least damaging to yourself. And that's the way to think of it. So why am I looking at this in the format of Brexit and current UK politics and World War? Now, and I realise that Vietnam wasn't World War, I was just using that as like a nice segue. I'm looking at this because when it comes to organisation and when it comes to activism and when it comes to political debate, there is so much personal attacking which occurs within it that I think people forget what they're actually doing. And they may not forget it. They may be completely aware, but from the outside perspective, people forget what they're doing. And it's that whole idea that if you're going to attack someone, you're going to attack their idea. That the main process from getting from point A to point B in the finishing school of doing things is that if you dehumanize your victim, it makes everything simpler. Doesn't matter what you're doing. Doesn't matter how you're approaching it. If you are a human being and there is other human beings standing in your way, dehumanizing them, thinking of them not as a person, makes the whole process simpler. Makes it so much easier for you to do the necessary steps, regardless of how bad those steps are, to do it. And it can be said completely the same in the opposite direction, that if you stop thinking of people as people, and you're able to dehumanize them, you can think of them more logically and efficiently. Now, obviously that has drawbacks and is a way of coping, essentially, and is used mainly to do things which are bad. But I think it's something which people can accidentally do without realizing that that's what they're doing. And this is why I bring up Brexit, and this is why I bring up the whole political landscape, is that you kind of sit back and look and think, am I attacking the issue or am I attacking the person? Have I just sat down and said that anyone believes one capacity is wrong and therefore evil, and if I label them evil, then therefore they're not human, because evil is an entity which I can't fight against, so therefore it's not human, only I can be human. Therefore it doesn't matter what I say about them. That's essentially what you do. And I've watched it, I've seen people do it, and people forget that people are human. And I recently put out a tweet, as I mentioned, I've been getting into Twitter mainly just to find podcast guests, people more kind of interesting than myself, and I've wanted to get politicians on the show, but I don't want them to talk about politics. I want them to talk about their lives, their interests, their general day-to-day. Do they like gardening? Maybe they're really into stamps. I don't know. I'm kind of curious, and I want to get the people who people hate, because there is this level of humanity, and the less you treat them like a human being, the more they'll act like a caricature, and the more you'll focus on that caricature. There's this whole trend, this historical trend of about Hitler, essentially, where people get really angry when you see photographs of him doing anything which isn't to do with the Nazi Party. So just general things like being in his garden, eating dinner, hanging out with someone else. It's weird to think of Hitler hanging out. I'm using modern terms to describe a dictator. But little things like that, and people can't handle it. They can't, because they've used the coping mechanism, which was dehumanizing him. If he's evil, if he's just an entity which you can hate, and an entity which is a representation of hate, then it's easier. It's easier to think, oh, well, this can never happen again. This could never change. The whole thing was just good versus evil. And when in reality, it was a person. It was a person who had a life, interests, and hobbies, and went on to dehumanize everybody else in order to commit an act which was atrocious. So it works from all manners of it. And I think it's important to remember when you look at causes and when you look at issues, especially social change issues, that you don't fall into the trap of dehumanizing your opponent. So Brexit obviously has brought out the best and the worst in terms of a lot of personality. Theresa May, who is our current Prime Minister, has received a lot of hate. And, I myself have directed hate towards her because I don't agree with certain things which have been done. And it's a very fine line to walk. But I think it's something which is important to kind of broach within your own mind when you form an opinion. When you look at something, instead of just calling out a name and going, oh, well, this person, blah, 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 associated with this thing, blah, 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 therefore evil, blah, blah, because to them it might make complete logical sense. And just yelling at them and going, you're wrong, everything you're saying is wrong, doesn't work. That's the whole problem with Donald Trump, is that he doesn't communicate, he doesn't discuss, he just shouts down, and that's why people hate him. This is why there's no dialogue. There's nothing to be said. And if you're doing that, you're doing exactly the same thing. You kind of sat just closing off all the doors and going, oh, no, this is not right. And it turns into just noise. It's just all white noise. And you're doing the same. You're dehumanizing your victim. Whilst your victim, in your view, obviously is wrong, there's no need, because you'll never get them to change their view if you approach it like that. There needs to be a balance of shouting and discussion, and I don't think there is that at the moment. I don't think there's that dialogue, because people are too busy focused on tearing people down on either side. I said I didn't want this podcast to be a don't stop yelling at the people you oppose. That's not what this is. I fully support activism. of any time, because it's people getting off their sofas and their beds and going and participating and generating discussion. And I think a lot of the best art in the world and a lot of the best conversations in the world happen when someone pokes the bear. But without that discussion aspect, it's redundant. That was the problem with punk. Punk was anarchy. It was about just pushing those buttons. There was no solution to it. So in the end point, it had to destroy itself. It would destroy itself. And I mean, it didn't in the end. The corporations did. As soon as you could buy Punk is Dead on a t-shirt. But that's a whole other problem. I'm getting away from that. But I don't know. I don't know if this is just me and how I view the world. I view the world quite logically. From what I think anyway. I mean, it might be circular logic and we may go round and round and round as we do in a podcast. But when I look at things, I have to think about what I'm about to say. And I try my best to broach a subject in a manner which considers the subject the main source material, not the person. I mean, I talk about Brexit and I talk about social issues, and like the last episode I did a solo cast was talking about white culture. I try never to try and focus on a singular person, because people, they're people. I want to open the discussion. I don't want to open the banter. I don't want to open the personal insults on issues, because it just ignores the issue, it ignores the concept. I mean, I think that's my problem with a lot of artwork, which only lauds the creator instead of the work. The work may not be amazing. It might be kind of subpar, but that gets ignored because we're so busy holding up the person to the camera and going, hey, this is the person, this look at this. If you disagree with the artwork, it's because you hate this. And that becomes another shield. It becomes another barrier for people to try and break through, to even have a conversation about things. And I don't think that's right. But it'd be interesting to hear what you think. Do we, as a society, generate coping mechanisms? Do you do it accidentally? Have you ever dehumanized someone without realizing it? I know I have. And I've had to go back and reconsider my stance on things. Do you think military is the finishing school? I don't know. I don't think humanity is inherently evil or inherently good. I think it's a choice we make. Or a choice you can be conditioned into one way or another. You might not end up with that choice. But I think unless we keep having the discussions about it, less people will get a choice. And that's it for today. I'll talk to you guys later.